So the key question I've got for us all is, what are the alternatives to standard testing, particularly when we think about diversity, inclusion, those types of things? So Nadine, I'm going to come to you first. What are your immediate thoughts?
So I definitely think standardized testing has a purpose. However, we know with everything there's limitations. And I know personally, I was that child who was rubbish in tests. Made me nervous, made me sweat. Couldn't gather all the things from my memory, which I knew. And so I walked out that room and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I forgot that, and so forth. So I think I was never able to show my best self in those tests that then produce those, standardized testing. So I think things such as, authentic assessments, I think are a very, very powerful tool. A way of assessing pupils it's a natural way of assessing in EYFS, early years. Where you have those portfolios, being able to give children a range of opportunities and experiences and give them that opportunity to demonstrate their learning, to apply their learning. And I think there is so much power in that, because it allows creativity and a range of skills and knowledge that you can then assess.
And in terms of alternative solutions that you might be trying in your own school, Nadine, are you doing things that aren't necessarily, I'm sure you're doing lots of things that aren't necessarily reported at a national level. And any suggestions for people watching?
Yeah, no, so we've introduced the idea of the pot of gold activity. So we think about the arc of the learning. So we're very, very clear on the learning objective. What is it we want the children to, what skills and knowledge we want the children to achieve over a period of time. And then at the end of it, what is it we want them to be able to do with those knowledge and skills? Or what experience do we want them to have in order to showcase that learning? So for example, I know one of my teachers did a lesson around length and perimeter. So we're currently developing our garden. And so the idea, the pot of gold activity, was for them to work out the measurements for certain plots that we needed. And actually it was real life application, because we do actually need to know the size. So that's an example. And we use that across a lot of our foundational subjects.
Sure, I love that expression, pot of gold. Thank you, Nadine. Bobby, as a mathematician, you'll know, numbers is obviously your world and super important, but we know that we need testing and standardization to a degree, but can I push you for any ideas on your alternatives to the current model we use?
So looking at it from a statistical perspective, the way generally examinations at UK at 16 and I guess at 18 as well are done, they're sort of norm reference, so the traditional bell curve. And for mathematics, and I think our subjects, English as well, it roughly is historically 1/3 on the bell curve. The bottom 1/3 will fail every single year. So as a nation, we have 1/3 of people that leave entering into the workplace thinking that they can't do maths, they can't do numeracy. And again, all the negative impacts there, again, trying to deal with money, trying to understand your bank balance, budgeting statements, all those things there. And how do we try to overcome that? Because again, that's the nature of standardized testing, where you will say X amount will fail. And I'm going to speak with the hat of, I'm an ambassador for a charity called National Numeracy. And what they try and do is work with government, organizations, communities to try to improve the state of numeracy in the UK. And instead of looking at, again, they say obviously GCSEs, there are purposes, because again, it gives sort of a credentials for people to move on to the next stage of exams, but they have something called a National Numeracy Challenge. And essentially what it is, it's similar to let's say for a driving test. Driving tests in the UK, people will do a theory test and a practical test. They're not bell curve reference. Essentially, they are, if you meet the certain set of standards to be deemed a competent driver, then you get the certificate. So again, in some years, you might get very high pass rates, in other years, low pass rates. Whereas with school examinations, it's literally just, here's the bell curve, let's make the bottom third fail. So I think if we're thinking about alternatives to examination systems, it should be less reference to the bell curve and more reference to have people met the standard required to progress. So I think it's, again, there's a stigma of failure is something that can be very damaging for children with the current, yes, 1/3 of maths, the rest pass and the others fail.
So you use the analogy of the driving test. I used to maybe use the analogy of the Scout or Girl Guide, perhaps. We can all make a fire, but you can make a really great fire and you get your fire badge, and I make an average fire and I still get the fire badge. Brett, can I bring you in here? What would you say your alternatives to the standardized system from your experiences running Pupil Progress?
Well, I mean, it's actually interesting because I've been making some notes here about the direction of the conversation. Not necessarily to do with Pupil Progress, but I think about my daughter, and she's obviously now in that place of finishing her first year of A-level and going on to second year A-level, and she's actually trying to work out what do I want to do. And my question that it evokes with me is, well, how are we assessing and actually testing students that prepare them for an actual career or moving forward with their life past school? And if I think about what some of the other countries, and I'm going to ban them because I know it's obviously a short period of time, but a lot of the Nordic countries are testing project-based learning where we can actually start to assess, well, Barack Obama, I watched a short video of his the other day. Are we teaching people how to get things done? Manage a project, within that project, be able to deliver, be able to organize themselves, core life skills that are just being kind of almost ignored at the, because we've got a national picture that we need to present, that we're very, good at English and good at maths. So it's actually, I suppose the question for me is, what are we doing to actually prepare our young people to go into work? And can we create an environment where we can enhance potentially the apprenticeships, the vocational side, where someone like myself, I'm in Nadine's camp. I was really, for me, GCSEs was a major problem-solving exercise. And I've later found out at the age of 33 that I was actually quite severely dyslexic. So I'm not quite sure how exams served me other than to problem solve that, get through that and go to the next stage.
Yeah, and I'm sure, there'll be thousands and thousands of students out there. I would probably put myself in that GCSE camp too with you. Matt, can I bring you in here? What from your experiences, the counselling, and you see, some probably lovely and horrific stories also. That question again, alternatives to assessment. What are your immediate thoughts?
Immediate thoughts. So as long as we've got a GCSE or an A-level system where we're asking kids to regurgitate knowledge via a syllabus, the only way you can assess them is a standardized test. But I'd go with what Brett was saying about the Scandinavian topic-based learning. I think we've got to be brave as a country to just maybe tear the rule book up. I'm really quite thankful that the guys that are going to be doing my hip and my knee operations a little bit later in life actually know the proverbial from their elbow, and I think they're the right kids to be doing that. But if we go from the topic-based learning, I think all of a sudden, rather than just learning about how much we know about something, maybe if we do group work, kids are working out whether they're leaders or followers. Or maybe kids are working out, well, don't put me in charge of the fact finding, but I'll deliver a brilliant presentation for you because I've got the gift of the gab and confidence to present. Where your textbook professor may well be licking the print off of all the research and all of the quotes that they can possibly find, but don't stand me up in front of 50 people because I will freeze and I won't be able to speak in front of people. So all of a sudden, are we able to take away this topic and this knowledge-based assessment and maybe put a humanistic strand into what our strengths and weaknesses are?
Working with teenagers up and down the UK, just in general, and working in the workshops that I'm working with, I'm going to chuck a very cliche line out there, and it's the Albert Einstein one. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And for me, I am dyslexic, struggled through school, also ADHD, so I was medicated whilst I was going through school. And I know what I went through to be able to just to come out the other end. And yes, you know, some exams do have a knock on your confidence. And when I was in year 11, and this is a common thing in my sessions, is I lived with my grandmother. My grandmother passed away. Then I had to focus on getting into school, attendance and stuff like this. I don't know what the solution is, because there's a lot more smarter people in the room than me at the moment. But all I know is in the space of even year 11 or year 10, a lot of things can happen in the life of the teenagers that we work with. So if you're just relying, you know, 90 minutes, 11 years comes down to 90 minutes, it doesn't sit right with me. You can do all the revision in the world, turn up to all the intervention clubs you can think of, but you can just get the flu on a day, or you might feel a bit, you might not have slept very well that night, and it can have an impact on, you know, the results. And sometimes that's life, and sometimes we have to be able to show an element of resilience and get through it and do what's asked of us, because I'm a great believer in doing the things that we don't want to do sometimes. That's discipline. But I do think, you know, what Matt was saying, at some point we're going to have a look at all of this, and maybe look for different options and different solutions out there, which would, you know, challenge everybody. And, you know,
you mentioned a good point, because, you know, if you look at the statistics on ADHD pupils here in England, if you have diagnosed ADHD, you're 100 times more likely to be excluded. And if you think about all those vulnerable children with, you know, children with our, you know, additional learning needs, again, this standardized model, you can see we've got quite a big headache still to fix.
Yeah, I'm really thankful for Brett for inviting me along here, because Brett would use me as a former data hater, so it's quite a brave introduction for me. But I think it's a blended process, because having the stats and having the information on how well a student is performing in a lesson on a breakdown is massively important, because it gives the subject the meaning, and it also gives the conversation that you might have with a student meaning. But it's not just how many percent they are away from a grade boundary. It's not just how close they are to getting that A or that 9 or whatever it is these days. It's more so that arm around conversation that you had about it. Is this worthwhile for you? Is this a significant conversation? Is this a significant subject for you? Do you need it? I think when you bounce the question back to, do the students need the conversation, I think you'll get your answer there. Because some kids will just simply say, I don't need this, sir. For what I need, I don't need geography. And it's harsh on those non-core subjects, because kids are getting strategic on what they are putting their efforts into, and that's not based on a kid just sacking a subject off. It's just streamlining their efforts into what they specifically need to get to the next level. And I think those authentic conversations that kids are having on the way back, as opposed to our conversations towards them, are really informing their effort levels or their interest or the significance of what we're trying to achieve with them, simply by whether they need it or not. And that's not in a selfish way. That's just in a strategic revision sort of way.
Yeah, you make a really valid point, Matt. My son's just started year 7, and as a teacher for 25 years, that experience from primary to secondary, and his experiences and conclusions of each day in each subjects, you know, there's some subjects that are winning, but you know, a good half of them starting to eat away at my soul, because he's starting to see aspects of things that he doesn't like. So it's quite painful to watch, sadly. Nadine, can I bring you in here? You know, you mentioned the pot of gold earlier, and there's clearly a great authentic example. How do you support your teachers to do that?
Yeah, so I think with anything like that, there's always that aspect of like quality assuring, training and so forth. So it's creating those opportunities for collaborative learning, for sharing ideas. It's really important as well that we can share resources. So we're very fortunate to be part of a trust. And so creating those opportunities to network across the trust, the number of schools, is really, really helpful. And I'm thankful that the trust provides those opportunities. And I think it's those professional dialogues and creating time for that to happen. Not just, yes, it can just happen authentically. I'm really fortunate because I've got really strong kind of family ethos, supportive ethos in my school, but actually sectioning out time for teachers to have those conversations and to share ideas and so forth are really, really key in order to support teachers with knowing what's possible.
So what I've seen in visiting schools and my own school, a teacher, is some schools, including my own, what we're trying to do is trying to tackle this concept of student compartmentalization. So again, I speak from a maths perspective, students who learn about how to plot a graph in maths. Then they'll go to science or geography or another subject of PE. And then when they're introduced to graphs in that lesson, they'll be saying, oh my God, I've never seen graphs before. Or they'll forget where to plot things. Yes. So I think students, they, maybe just a human feature, they will sit in a maths lesson, think, oh, this is maths. And now when they leave the lesson, everything from maths is forgotten. And again, they're in a geography lesson and they'll say, oh, I have a geography brain now. So what we've been trying in our school is when we're thinking about assessments, and it gets early stages, so I haven't got any results to show for it yet, but we're trying to think when we're teaching science or teaching PE or teaching geography, what are the commonalities? And again, I speak from a maths perspective. Again, one thing is students need to understand data and how to plot graphs and how to interpret it. We're trying to see when we do assessments, again, in, let's say, looking at graphs, how can we align the way in which we teach and assess drawing graphs and interpreting graphs across the different subjects? Because I feel as if you're trying to make learning something that's across the curriculum, you need to make sure that students are not being like, almost like, I don't know, what's the animal that pokes its head in is it an ostrich or an animal that pokes its head into one subject? Oh, I'm in a maths lesson. And they go to another subject, like, oh, I'm in PE now. But actually, when our students enter the real world, no one ever says, oh, use your maths brain, use your English brain. They just want you to think and come up with a solution. So the same way, teaching should be more linked up and joined together.
Absolutely. And, that kind of approach to that whole overview, I guess, is something that we've still got quite a bit of work to do here in England. Cam, can I bring you in here? Things that you see, I know a particular role that you do with schools in particular, but have you come across any schools that are doing assessment really well?
Firstly, I just want to say what Bobby just mentioned, I think is absolutely key. And that's one form of way I could try and get the students motivated, especially for year 11, is I try and get, I normally ask them, I say, what does a car mechanic need to fix a car? They always say tools. And I say, okay, the same way a car mechanic used tools to fix a car to get the job done is the same way you can use school as a tool to get you to where you want to get to. So for me, what Bobby was just saying then, and actually not putting your maths brain on English or science brain and actually thinking about the overall picture, I think will result in better outcomes long term, because I feel like sometimes, depending on what schools I go into, and obviously I'm not going to mention names, sometimes there's a massive divide, and it's very difficult for the students to think outside of those individual boxes. As far as just data collection, there's some schools I go to which are all over it, and they also can provide me with certain data. You got effort, you got a wide range of different data. Then you've got other schools who may not be investing as much time in it apart from the normal behavior and attendance. I don't know enough about the inside outside what you guys do. But one thing that I do when I go into a school is I do look at a lot of the data, and that is very handy for me to create a direction, because most of the time we don't know the end destination. We think we do, but what is the direction to actually get there? And that's really why I use a lot of the data which is provided for me. But as far as individual subjects, I mean, you guys are the ones.
I was at a training event the other week, and I think one thing that I tend to do is get the data of the people in front of me, that are not data from the actual adults, but who's in the room, not as a teacher per se, with student data, to allow you to develop and lead a more engaging session. I guess the key thing from assessment is it shouldn't tell us things we already know, but tell us where we are as teachers and how we can make our interventions more targeted. One of my favorite phrases is, there's many roads to Mecca. We can go down the M25, we can take a boat from Dover all the way around to Riyadh, or we can fly directly from Heathrow. So, we've got the written, the summative, the formative assessment. This is the next topic I'd like to switch to, is the formative. Many teachers will use the words marking or feedback, but there's other words such as feed up and feed forward, which are different types of formative assessment.
Yeah, no, it's a good point raised, Ross. I think we need to look at it not just from the pupil point of view of informing them how close they are to grade boundaries or how far off they are or what they can do to achieve to get to the next level. I think we need to look at it in terms of who's it for. All of a sudden, that formative assessment stuff, from what I'm hearing on the ground now, isn't just about us telling the kids how good they are. It's all about the teachers actually getting a gist from the kids about how good that particular part of the course was. And I think if everybody is in this process together, that informs not just the learning, but it also informs how good the teaching is. I think maybe you've got a more of an authentic assessment system where people are actually talking two ways, rather than this is just a one-way conversation about how much the kid has to do to improve, or how far for grade level they are. The kids can actually, and this, I think this is the trigger stuff for some staff that I talk to as well. A kid talking back about them not getting it because it wasn't taught very well it's not necessarily a slur. How brave and how resilient are we as educators to go, maybe you've got a point, maybe I need to teach that again or in a different way.
Yes.
But I think more and more it can be used in schools, departments, individually as a two-way process. I think you'll have a better quality conversation, more of a qualitative conversation rather than a quantitative conversation.
So the question, I guess, is, and it's a big one for a kind of short soundbite from each of you, is how can we ensure that teacher evaluations of one another as well as of our students are fair, reflective, free from bias if possible, and actually represent actual performance? So, Bobby, I'm going to come to you this time.
How do we tackle bias at a society-wide level? Because that, again, if it's tackled at a society-wide level, then it filters through to the classroom. So, again, classrooms, we're trying to, we ultimately reflect what's happening in the wider world.
I know, even, I'm a mother of 3 boys. And I remember when I was pregnant with my first son being told by a family member not to call them a certain name because they'll be at a disservice just because of their name. And I did go ahead and still call my son Elijah. But again, it's that stereotype, of, okay, well, that's the black name. People will know that when they look on a CV and so forth. So he's at a natural disservice, which is a very, very sad thing. And it's very, very real that we do live in a society where it's there's discriminatory practices, biases, racism, all sorts. Which we know, for many do not want to be there, but it is a systemic issue. So in terms of tackling it on school level, I think it's really important to it's all about the culture that you set. And it does start from the top. It really, really does. Not to say that there cannot be some level of power in other roles, but it is really important that as leaders that we create the culture of training and really resting the importance of addressing these issues and, with, for example, anti-racism training and so forth, and creating a safe and supportive environment so that people can make mistakes and errors, because a lot of times these conversations are not had around biases and so forth because people are nervous. They're nervous about it. And so it's really, really important that leaders create a safe environment where people can make mistakes, that it's a learning environment, recognizing, for example, I shifted the whole idea of work and we talked to children about learning and really highlighting how it's a privilege to learn. So it's always about learning, but then also I'm a head learner. We are all learners. So it's really important, again, to create those spaces, to have those important dialogues.
It makes me just think about how I perceive the word bias. And when COVID hit and we were talking about teacher assessed grades and centre assessed grades, we actually used the terms unconscious bias quite a lot in the webinars that we were running. And it was the missed students, the ones that were missed because, a very, very two different profiles. The student works really hard. They're a really nice kid. Therefore, they should be achieving a good grade. And then the other profile, which is restless, difficult, challenging. Therefore, it's going to be a poor grade or poor performance. And actually, what we need to make sure that tracking and monitoring and that ability to see the outcome of assessments without bias really starts to make sure that those students don't get missed. And it's the ones that are either or profile, because I've seen so many kids that are really well behaved but that they don't get the attention they deserve because they're slipping through because they're really well behaved and they're also really attentive, so that must mean they're going to do well, and then actually fail. And then the student's actually very bright but restless for a different reason. They've got, you know, different learning needs, all of a sudden did pretty well, but the data tells you, wow, they could have done exceptionally well. And that's, you know, one of my passions about this is actually not missing those students and taking away the bias with effective use of data. I suppose my response really is about how we drill into deep classroom practice rather than what's happening around the bias happening nationally, because I do understand it, but we can actually combat that bias of all. I mean, those two profiles I gave are just very broad and generic, but that bias is happening in the classroom with so many different types of subgroups and different types of students all over.
I guess the big question is the future of assessment. If you had one wish in one sentence, everybody, what would it be? So I'll come to you, Brett, and then I'm going to come back to everyone just for one concluding remark, if that's okay, and then I'll wrap things up.
Technology has the huge amount of power, and I'm not just talking about pupil progress, of helping me as a teacher, school leaders, students, most importantly, feel less anxious about where they are, what they need to do. And I'm not just talking about pupil progress either. I'm talking about formative assessment tools, about organizational tools, about Google run schools that allow them to understand what homework needs to be completed, organization. So technology can be massively powerful. And I want to just finish on this, so I'm not going to go on a massive rant, especially with Matt on the call as well. My fundamental belief is, if a student can compartmentalize that, okay, you know, that's going well, that's in order, I know what I need to do, even though it's not going well, so I'm taking action on that. I'm creating room to actually think about who I am as a person and the more deeper skills as to how do I self-regulate? How do I manage my anger? I didn't know I got anger. Actually, schools are going to start to see, and this is my fundamental belief, is being able to understand where students are and what they need to do in order to achieve well from an exam. Is going to create room to bring in people like Matt, to bring in people like Cam, to bring in people, you know, like Bobby, that are going to say, look, there's a bigger picture out there than just exams, but we do need to get that right, but we can create room for it. So if I carry on, I'll keep going, and I'll probably just leave it at that point.
If I bounce over to Cameron now, who probably on a similar theme with that emotional well-being side. Cameron, any wishes?
Just something where, you know, if they do genuinely have a really bad day, then there's maybe another opportunity, and quite an opportunity soon, where they can rectify any issues, or you wake up with the flu, or your grandma died, or whatever it is.
Yeah, the really good sensible alternative to you're either ready on that one day or you're not, and then that's your chance. I guess in the assessment grand scheme of how we currently do things in our education system here in England, is there one thing you'd like to see done differently?
Not too much done different. Accurate assessments at the current stage, but we're looking at just exam-based outcomes. That needs to be accurate, but also an emotional strand that gets the well-being of the student as well as the student's performance.
Sure.
I think for me, it would be around learning styles and that personal. That every child will be represented fairly and accurately through the use of assessment. Then that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. So as a mathematician and someone that loves data and stats, obviously, like, I believe that the increasing use of real-time data will transform our ability to correct course our students in the real time. But whilst there's data and numbers, I think the really important thing is we mustn't forget the value of individual humans and individual teachers and their professional judgment, because with this drive towards using tech, AI, ChatGPT, we mustn't forget that education is ultimately delivered by a human thinking, feeling person to children who are real people, not just data points.
Fantastic. And data points. So, you know, a key word for you, Brett. What would you hope would be, you know, a wish for the assessment system, you know, considering that your platform relies on those data points?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I'm going to go quite broad, because the moment you asked a question, my instant gut feel was personalized to the needs of our young people. You know, again, considering what I spoke about my daughter's journey, but then actually just listening to Bobby is actually, I would really love to see something that students can be assessed in a way that meets the needs of their future. And actually, we are part of an education system that's giving them the skills that allows them to be successful outside of school and not just to pass an exam. So that would be my wish for assessment. That'd be my wish for the future of education.
Brilliant, and that's a good way to finish. So I'm just going to end formal procedures there.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
Sorry.
Go.
Ross, what about you?
Oh, well, what about me? Well, yeah, so a very good question. A one-size-fits-all only fits one person. So if we've got 9.1 million children in our education system, we need 9.1 million alternatives. I don't think it's anything we're going to fix anytime soon. But thinking about all our different backgrounds and stories and how we're trying to always meet the individual needs of our students in a challenging system, which is time poor and not funded, we have to work harder at genuine assessment alternatives that take our, hence why we're here, the future of assessment into the next decade. So I don't know if that's a coherent or simple answer. I think it's very difficult to make these things quite pragmatic, but we've got lots of work to do. I'm going to wrap things up, everybody. So can I just thank you all for your time? So brilliant people, beautiful people, brilliant minds, and loads of alternative and interesting suggestions. Thank you so much for joining me. And for everyone watching publicly also, thank you for taking part. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Could I just remind everybody on the screen here, there's a QR code here where you can learn a little bit more about the brilliant work that Pupil Progress are doing, kindly, who have helped co-host and organize this event and bring everyone to place. Can I thank Brett, Matt, Nadine, Bobby, and Cam all for your words of wisdom. And thank you, everybody, for joining me. Other than that, can I wish you a good evening, stay safe, be happy, and have a good evening. Bye for now.